ATH 910 AM, Frisco, Dallas, Fort Worth, and North Texas on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Catholic radio for your soul. Heard also at grnonline.com and on your smartphone.
Welcome to The Quest from the studios of the Guadalupe Radio Network. Join us as we journey together on this pilgrimage of faith. And now your host, Monsignor Charles Pope. Good afternoon, Monsignor. I'm shaking my head at AI Jesus. It feels weird to say I'm shaking my head at Jesus, but we know that there's a real big difference there, and that's I don't know what they're thinking. So let's pray for the universal church as we get things started here today. If you'd lead us, please. Amen.
here is that it goes out. He takes and he puts down the judgment seat. There's a chair that he has put down on the pavement there called Gabbatha, the pavement. And it says he sat in the judgment seat. Now, who sat in the judgment seat? It's ambiguous intentionally in John's. I'm quite sure intentionally in John's thing here. Who's really sitting on the judgment seat? Well, historically, it was Pilate. He's judging Christ, handing him over to death. But the one who's really on the judgment seat is Christ. And Pilate's judging himself by his decision. He's saying, look, I know in my heart this guy's innocent. My wife told me I have nothing to do with this innocent man. I heard of him in a dream, but he knows what he should do, but he doesn't do it. And so in a way, he's the one who's on trial. Christ is in the judgment seat. You and I have a decision to make about Jesus Christ. And what will that decision be? Will he be the king and the Lord of your life? Now, what is a king? Well, a king has authority. A king must be obeyed and so on. We owe things to the king. I hate to say it like taxes, but I mean, at the end of the day, do we treat Christ that way? Or is he just kind of some guy we talk to occasionally and when we feel like it and hope that he'll do our agenda? See? And are we more interested in what the world has for us and what the world says? You see, these are the questions that we have to wrestle with in this. So you see, Christ is on trial, but really you and I are on trial. And really Pilate's on trial. He has a decision to make. So do you, so do I. So what do you think, Matthew? I have decided to follow Jesus. All right.
I think that's good advice there. Yeah. I don't want to preview the coming segments, but you talked a little bit about being a politician and what do the people want. And,
yes. Yeah,
I think that could be applied to President-elect Trump in a way. I think that he's sensing the barometer of the country, because I feel like there's a shift in the country right now, and that may be a good thing. But that's sort of one of the things that come to mind. I love the feats of Christ the King. I love that which Pius was it that instituted that?
Oh, Pius the 11th, yeah.
Pius the 11th, yeah, that he saw the need for this and to, sort of counter what was going on in the world at the time. So yeah, it's quite beautiful.
And I think, there is, like I mentioned, and I know you agree with, there's got to be some kind of a balance at one level, especially in our system. We expect our politicians to listen to us and to know our concerns and act on them. On the other hand, I also want my politicians to have some kind of a moral core, because the crowd is not always right. What is right is not always popular, and what is popular is not always right. So we need, but unfortunately, we tend to get more of the politicians who have, I got to get elected, and that's kind of the setup. So decisions, my goodness, may it be for all of us, Christ the King. Well, when we return, we're going to be looking next at the question of some issues that came up in the election, the issues, not the candidates per se, when we return.
Hey y'all, Sarah Soto, the Monday Thursday host of The Quest here. I am so excited for our show on Monday. Hey Beginner Wives, Michelle Lentz is going to be on with us to talk about practical tips and heartfelt advice to help you have a happy marriage. Whether you've been married for a year or 50, she's got some incredible advice to give for brides and grooms. Please tune in and listen on Monday on The Quest at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. God bless you.
Hi, Debbie Georgiani here, along with Adam Bly, co-hosts of The Spirit World.
It's foolish to undertake any major task without preparation. Even for something like Thanksgiving dinner, you get ready way in advance. How much more important is it to prepare your spirit to encounter God?
On the next episode of The Spirit World, let's talk about what it means to prepare our hearts and ways that our listeners can do that for themselves. Listen to The Spirit World this Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern.
Welcome back to The Quest, an extraordinary journey where every step brings us closer to discovering God's love for us. Want to join the conversation? Give us a call at 877-757-9424.
All right, and we're back. And 877-757-9424. All right. Call and let us know what you think. I have to say, we had this election and we focused a lot on the who won, the presidential election and maybe some other local election that interested us. But there were a lot of issues on the ballot, too. And I'm using a little print edition here, the National Catholic Register. It came out this week that kind of summarizes a lot of those things, key results for Catholics. And I have to say, overall, the picture's a little discouraging. There are some wins, but so we have issues here such as abortion, school choice, drugs, assisted suicide, and marriage. So let's just take a kind of a quick look at some of these and maybe have a little bit of a discussion about them. In Nebraska, regarding abortion, in Florida, Nebraska, and South Dakota, they all voted down major pro-abortion proposals in their states, and trying to either install them as state law in the Constitution or extending the right to abortion all the way for all 9 months. Different things were on the ballot. So 3 states voted well: Florida, Nebraska, and South Dakota. However, 6 other states, Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, and New York, all saw voters approve measures to expand abortion. And a couple cases to codify it in the state constitution. And so on. So again, it's that's kind of discouraging. 6 states expanded, 3 states kept it restricted in some sense. So again, we have a real battle. I mean, everything has really changed. I did see an article I wasn't able to read, but there are beginning to be some meetings among pro-life Catholics who are saying we've got to begin to talk to each other and come up with new strategies. There's a lot of things here. Now, regarding school choice, I was quite surprised by this, really. It was overwhelmingly rejected in several states. Kentucky, voters in Kentucky, generally I would think a red state, but anyway, overwhelmingly rejected using public funds for charter schools. Charter schools are privately run but publicly funded. I have a charter school in my old school building here in D.C., and they run a values-based program and so on. So yes, but anyway, they overwhelmingly rejected it. This isn't just religious schools. The charters usually are run by private companies, so to speak, private schools. Well, enough said there. Nebraska voters repealed a recent school choice scholarship program. Meanwhile, a Colorado proposal to establish a right to school choice in the Constitution failed. So right there, boom, 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 three losses. In my department, when I say a loss, it's not a Catholic moral teaching per se, but just the idea that our public schools are such indoctrination centers and are failing so badly. I mean, we're like number 38 in math comprehension in the world. Really? We're number 38. Oh, that's a number I'm having trouble understanding at 38. I mean, it's remarkably bad system right now. And yet I think any alternative you can get for people and to create a little bit of healthy competition is a good thing. I don't know, Matthew, you have some thoughts on these 2 issues?
Well, I do. Let's talk about the school choice thing for a moment. Very interesting. I don't know if you caught it, but today in Texas, they had I'm not sure exactly the board, but they approved a curriculum that talks about Bible stories for elementary school. It's an optional thing, but apparently there's money tied to it. So if you use that curriculum, there's potentially some additional funding for you. Now, this is not teaching a particular religion. It's just, which I think is very appropriate, not to teach a specific religion, but I think it's very appropriate to talk about why these Bible stories are part of culture, part of society, right? They're looking at Leonardo da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper, and they say, here's what the Last Supper is, here's where it's in the Bible. Or they're talking about the Good Samaritan and why, you should be treating other people well, and the Golden Rule.
Right.
So that's at one spectrum of this.
Mhm.
There's also the narrative that President-elect Trump is going to potentially abolish the Department of Education. I'd be very curious to know where American education was back when Jimmy Carter was president, which is when I think they instituted the
Yeah.
Department of Education. I bet we
Correct.
weren't 38th, you know?
No,
So
that's for sure.
I'm a big fan of, subsidiarity. And
Yeah.
if we can get some of these decisions out of the federal government and move them to the states, I think states can make better decisions for themselves,
Yes.
which leads me to the abortion topic, because that's the current state of abortion in America right now, which it's on the state level. And I think we both talked about how the pro-life movement needs to sort of shuffle things around and come at abortion with a different approach that focuses on states and how to change things in the states. The
Yeah.
final statement is really talking about why a republic is better than a democracy. So in places like Florida, they were trying to amend the Constitution to put abortion onto it, and when it's these state constitutional votes, it's not a 51% wins or a 50+1 wins. So it's not just this mob rule decision. To
Right.
get something into the Constitution, it needs a much larger majority. I don't know the details of how the Florida state government works, but obviously they didn't get that massive amount of support that was pro-abortion to try to move that into the
Yeah.
Florida Constitution. So in some aspects, I think that there's hope for the future. But I think the battlefield is kind of changing on all these things. I'm surprised by the school choice thing. I think the people are sort of fed up with failing schools, and my son goes to a private Catholic school, and my daughter goes to a charter school, and I feel that they get a much better education than they would if they went to the public school in the town that I live in. So,
Right.
Let choice be out there in terms of education, so that the best options rise to the top, and the things that are failing just go by the wayside.
Well, that's it. A couple of other things here regarding drugs. Measures to legalize marijuana were defeated in Florida and North Dakota and South Dakota. Well, two measures authorizing medical use of marijuana, et cetera, were approved in Nebraska. Massachusetts voters also decided against a measure that had been aimed to legalize psychedelic drugs. That's just what we need, man. People on LSD and weird stuff.
I know, right?
And but as I say, I think even marijuana has a terrible effect on people's minds, their brains. They just have no motivation. It's not just while you're using it. I just see this. I always knew as a kid when some of my classmates started smoking dope, their mind went on holiday. They had no motivation. Hey man, I ain't got to go to the men's class, man. Got me a job pumping gas. That kind of stuff, sad, but I think people need to wake up and find out more about what it does to the brain. Sadly, all the things on marriage were basically a failure on our side. In other words, pretty much there were attempts to, they've removed the marriages between, and several. I'll just read it here. It says voters in California passed a measure that removed existing language in the Constitution that defined marriage between a man and a woman. Colorado voters also repealed a ban on same-sex civil unions, and voters in Hawaii removed language referring to men or women in marriage, and so on. So very, very sad losses there. Regarding assisted suicide, we can at least say this much. West Virginia voters approved a constitutional ban on physician-assisted suicide in that state. So some mixed results, but mostly I would have to say, unfortunately, negative. And we got a lot of work to do. This culture, as I said, whoever wins the election, we said this, before the election, you and I were speaking, we're in trouble. Our culture is in a very 0 dark 30 position when it comes to really important issues. And frankly, I even think this whole immigration thing, I'm against illegal immigration too, but I cannot see And I hope we're not the kind of a nation that would allow this expression, mass deportations. I mean, if we're talking about criminals and people who have, I know they all broke, if they're illegal, they broke a law. All right, I get that. But I'm talking about violent criminals or those who have caused lots of problems here. But I think if they go much further and they start deporting families and business owners and other folks, I think they're rightfully, Americans will stand up against that, and I hope we do. So I'm sure the media will have all the quote unquote sob stories ready to show us. But I think in some cases, not just sob stories. They would be, I think, at some point, I think we have to allow people who have come here. They were often lied to and misled, saying they could come, it would be ignored. They were told a lot of stories. Not everybody is here illegally in the same way. Some people were here legally, they came legally, but their green card or whatever, some type of thing expired and they just didn't get it renewed. Other people did just walk across the border, illegally, knowing it was illegal. But again, as I say, a lot of them were kind of told, well, they don't really enforce it. So I just think we have to be careful to not, as Catholics, just have an R after the name. We want to have a Catholic after the name. And I think we better be pretty careful. I don't think it's in the heart and soul of Americans to just see huge, vast numbers, 13 million people sent back. I just don't see that's going to happen. But if it does start to happen, I think we need to speak out as Catholics and say, look, illegal immigration is one thing, but we shouldn't support it, and we should be very clear now to enforce it going forward. So that's my thought on it. I don't know. You have some thoughts of your own?
Well, you're going to get me in trouble again. But, my philosophy is you can have an open border or you can have a welfare state, but you can't have both.
Yeah.
Right? If someone is coming from another country and it's so horrible there that it's better to be in the United States, I'm okay with them being in the United States. But they can't be here living entirely off of the dole.
Yeah, right.
Taking away from, money that's intended for, natural citizens here. And, but that's where the church has a role to step up and to take care of these people. So we've gotten so far out of balance that it's become a hyper complicated situation. Right. So I agree with you. We don't want to see, families all getting rounded up and sent away. Obviously, like you said, start with the violent criminals and the people who are a danger to society. But like I said in our last conversation, we have to wait and see how some of this plays out, right? We don't want to be jumping to conclusions too much. Right. And as Catholics, we need to be compassionate and we need to try to do the best that we can.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're that's a good thing. We have to watch and see how it unfolds and not just listen to, all the panic talk, but on the other hand, to be vigilant and to say, there's going to be, I think, when we hear statistics that say that Americans are vastly in support of deporting illegal immigrants, I think that there's nuances that are missed. I don't think that they have the same feelings across the board about every single immigrant who's here. Illegal immigrant, that is. I think there would be a lot of nuances that some of these polls aren't currently, but it's just too simplistic to say, well, Americans support this by a large majority. Well, support what? I mean, what kind of deportation? What do we, that kind of a thing? I think clearly the criminal element is very, very clear, and it gets a little murkier as you go down. But I think you're right. If there are people here just living on welfare and things like that, those would be some other things to consider. And so anyway, enough said, but we're going to go to the break. And I realize people are passionate about this, but I really hope that we'll think as Christians and Catholics before we just think knee-jerk politically. Okay. Now, we're going to talk when we come back about the Holy See is broke. And it's an article in the Pillar that we'll talk about when we return.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. A White House ceremony done in secret has given former Planned Parenthood leader Cecile Richards the Medal of Freedom. In doing so, President Biden identified freedom with abortion. Anticipating the new Congress, legislation is being pushed to eliminate the FACE Act. Sponsors say the law allows selective prosecutions. Violent abortion activists escape prosecution, while pro-life peaceful demonstration and even acts of self-defense have met with the full force of federal law, ranging from armed arrests before children to extraordinary sentencing. A complaint filed Wednesday asks a federal court to block Illinois from enforcing abortion coverage mandates. Plaintiffs, a coalition of pro-life education, church, and business entities, say Illinois' actions violate the free exercise and association rights guaranteed by the First Amendment, as well as more than a few federal statutes. This is Life News Radio. A culture of life has a rarely mentioned but very formidable enemy. Pornography is material that deceives its consumers into thinking that they possess beauty, while the reality is they are possessed by a lie. The first step may be to talk openly with your pastor or confessor, reject the lie, and recognize that a culture of life relies upon you. Catholic Vote says the Men's March to abolish abortion in Boston met with radical and violent resistance, blocking pro-life advocates for about an hour Saturday. Police arrested 17 pro-abortion protesters. And state attorneys are fighting what abortion industry attorneys are calling Kentucky's equivalent of Roe v. Wade. The effort to roll back protections for the unborn is using a woman 8 weeks pregnant who is seeking an abortion under the pseudonym Mary Poe. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
You're listening to The Quest, a pilgrimage of faith. Have a question or something to share? Call the show live at 877-757-9424.
Okay, that's 877-757-9424. All right, now listen, we have I have an article here from the Pillar in front of me, and it says here, the Holy See is going broke, but in the light of the increasingly frequent and increasingly panicked statements from the Holy Father to this effect, he says, I'm prepared to say that we've moved from the gradually phase to suddenly. So the Pope is very concerned. He says, particularly the Vatican pension fund will be unable to meet its obligations in the medium term. So right now they're meeting them, but it's not likely in a couple of years they'll be able to meet them. That's a kind of a sacred trust, when you get into a pension plan, and we tend to not be so good at putting them in a kind of a lockbox, But anyway, all that aside, there's been some recent salary cuts that have been put in. But regarding the whole problem, there doesn't seem to be a lot of indication there's going to be much done about it. Now, there was an interesting thing, especially for us here in Washington. Cardinal Farrell, he was one of our bishops here, and then later in Dallas. He's now in the Vatican. He's been now appointed as the sole pension czar. That's not the Vatican term, but you get it. Apparently, they were having a hard time as a committee making tough decisions and investment decisions and things about the money. So he's a skilled financier, and hopefully he'll be able to help with that a bit. But listen, the numbers are alarming. The deficit in the fund is more than 900 million euros. 900 million. That's close to $1 billion, y'all. Now, some people have in the Vatican responded by saying that's alarmist. It's only 600 million. Well, all right. But whatever. Fixing the pension thing, though, is only a small part of the puzzle. And yes, so what can be done? What can be done? They can stamp out financial corruption and waste. Belts can be tightened. But all of this, at best, is just slowing the slide into illiquidity. And so we kind of come back to the other side of the equation, namely income. And to date, though, the author here in the Pillar says, I've seen and heard nothing to suggest there's a very serious plan in the development office to address, in development, I should say, a plan to address the shortfall of revenue. Quite simply, the Vatican needs to make more money right now, like yesterday. They had, some ill-fated and really bad optic plans. Remember they tried to have these properties in England, and it was kind of the hope of lucking into some high yield investments with Vatican properties, and but it created a lot of bad will, and it failed. So, but there just don't seem to be any. Okay, here's what we're going to do to try to either build up our investments or sell some land, or what can be done. So, serious fundraising. There has to be some way for the Vatican to say, look, we're going to need some help. But it's not like, well, you can do some belt tightening, but there's a very interesting chart in the article. The Vatican is not running or spending extravagantly on all of the Vatican dicasteries. In fact, most of them have very small budgets, 2 to 3 million euro. It's not that much when you consider the cost of having office and basic communication stuff and several employees and so on. And it's very frugal, most of it. There are a lot of things the Vatican has to do to maintain its buildings, and they're very old and historic buildings and so on. But really, works of charity, lots of organizations designed to help the poor and suffering throughout the world are what take the bulk of the money. So I guess on the expense side, one thing they'd have to decide is whether they can continue to afford all this and say, well, we're poor. How can we help the poor? But again, all of these are ways of saying that what the article of the Pillar says here is that there has to be some serious approach to this. Now, he then says this in the article, J.D. Flynn in the article, he says, they have to bring in more money. And you also, if you're going to bring in more money, you sort of have to tell people how you spend it. And the Vatican isn't very good at that. People are sometimes excited to give when they know what it's going for. So that's going to some big fund for the Vatican, And so again, this is going to go for some of these things, you see, and this is how you do. But and he says that, but he dismisses the idea. Don't tell me we can't raise the money. He says, dioceses like here in Washington and so on, we're able to raise money to keep a lot of these things going. And but here's why he says, I don't think anything's going to happen, and the Vatican will become insolvent. No one is in charge of making it happen. See, the Vatican has plenty of people in charge of spending money and plenty more tasked with giving it away. But who is the chief revenue officer? Nobody. And he says, if there's nobody to do it, it's not going to get done. And so right now there's a lot of hand wringing and clutching of pearls and all. At the end of the day, no one's been appointed. We got to deal with how we can raise some more money and bring it in. We have to inspire people with stories about what some of this money goes for. And now, as I say, that's kind of where it is in the Vatican. And it's too bad, I think, that there isn't someone, there has to be somebody in charge of revenue. But apparently there isn't. So, well, I don't know, Matthew, you have any thoughts on this? My brother always said to me, it's not what you earn, it's what you spend. But I really think the Vatican isn't overspending in most critical areas. But anyway.
Yeah, they're probably not crazy spending on things. I don't fully understand the graph. I took a peek at that. But it's like the Vatican is not a business other than the business of saving souls, right? Yeah. So evangelization needs to be our primary work. Getting people to heaven needs to be our primary work. Right. The more saints we I guess create or encourage, I think the saints of heaven will take care of the church. And of course there's that narrative that, if they just sold all the gold and the vestments and the art, they'd probably be able to take care of themselves for 1 or 2 years, and then they'd be broken.
Not even that. I would say about 6 hours.
Yes, we'll say 6 weeks. I had some faith in Cardinal Pell.
Yeah,
when he was trying to look and do some reforming, but that whole thing sort of fell apart.
Well, that, yeah, so, a mess.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic for another day. But I mean, putting someone who's savvy at this, but is not just an administrator. It's got to be someone who has a heart
Yeah.
for the church, and
Yeah.
I think that's
Mhm.
I think that's the only solution, really.
Yeah. Well, it's like we have to do on fundraising here at the GRN network and so on. We have to paint pictures for people to say, someone, if you help us, we can reach people in their cars or
Yeah.
in their homes. And suddenly they hear us, and we have story after story of people who've, heard us either on the radio or a podcast, all the different shows and things that are offered. And they said, wow. And so, get people a little more excited about the evangelical work of the church. And there's not a lot of excitement because there's not a lot of urgency. No, you have even the Pope saying, well, all religions are a way to God, Well, okay, then I'm going to sit back here and just let it all work itself out. At some level, there's no real urgency to save souls today. And that's our main, like you say, that's our main work.
Right. I feel like the Vatican gets distracted sometimes with, some of these global issues that, like the climate change stuff or,
Right.
something, it's very Eurocentric in terms of some of their philosophies. But for the record, any of our listeners, you need to know the Guadalupe Radio Network, we don't get a dime from the Vatican. So
No.
just if you think that there's like, this powerhouse of, Catholicism and everything's all paid for. No, I mean, we're struggling as well too, but I think we have a very clear mission in what we're doing, and we do see results. We do see people coming to the church, having their questions answered about the faith.
Sure.
So, maybe the Vatican could take a little bit of a hint from us in the work that we're doing. So.
The other thing is, you sounded like me in a typical budget meeting at the archdiocese. I keep banging my hand on the table. We don't have a money problem. We have a people problem. People aren't going to church. we have to. They're not having babies either.
That's essentially it, right?
Yeah, right.
So
yeah, you're right. I think that if we're really doing the Lord's work, it will come. The money will come.
Yep.
That said, I don't want to be too harsh on the Vatican. I mean, can you imagine sitting atop a church of 1.3 or 4 billion people in the world and all that history and all that kind of stuff? I mean, it's just lots. It's just a lot of stuff that's traditionally there, and some of these outreaches and stuff. The vast number of the amount of money goes out toward. It does go out towards evangelization. For example, 38 million versus say the congregation for the doctrine of the faith has about 3 million euro. I mean, so versus 38 million for communications or for evangelization works. And also the apostolic nunciatures take 41 million, and you got to have an ambassador in just about every country in the world. And then you have to have a place for him to live and a staff and all of these kinds of things. So I think somewhere in there, when you want to go in there and cut, sadly, the things that are the juiciest, to cut the most, save the most is going to be stuff like, $38 million for the dicastery on communication, or some of these places where we send money to the poor. And that's the saddest thing of all, I think, that they may have to find that they just can't contribute at the level anymore.
Well, and I know in the past several years, the people who donate to Peter's Pence has really been down. So I think some of that is that's
Right.
optics, and that's reassuring people that the Pope is on the right path with doing the things that the church needs to do, not bring in. I mean, I don't know where money goes for stuff, but like it seems like there's some really wasteful modern art stuff going on, and acrobatic stuff, and
Right.
I just think stick with what we do well, stick with the classics, and I still see the future of the church's tradition. So embrace tradition, and
Right.
Then look at all the young new families, and I think that's hope for the future.
I certainly am with you, and I do think the Peter's Pence is part of it. It's not a main source of income, but it is important. And you're right, it's down, and we'll have to see if that's a Francis effect or what it is. But look, I'm looking here at some of the most expensive things each year. So evangelization, 21 million. Dicastery of Communication, 38 million. That's publishing lots of things and getting things out as part of evangelization. But you add up the four biggest categories here, and they're not even close to they're about 100 million euros, and the pension fund is underfunded by $900 million. Wow. Now that's not, it's not even close. It's really, really, it's almost like an impossible situation. What happens when an irresistible force hits an immovable object? Something's going to blow up here. And I don't know. I don't know I'm not enough of a financial analyst to know all these. I can say this much, that that there are, though, good financial minds. And the fact that no one's even appointed on the revenue side to say, well, what are some of the things we can do? Because the Vatican does have a lot of vast properties. I say vast, but maybe that's too over. But it has a lot of good properties. I don't know why or how, but they've been donated over the centuries. And the question is, well, how could we, maybe invest or sell some of that? I don't know. But I just think that there are better minds that can do this. I've seen priests go into impossible parishes and turn them around. And it for the right kind of mind, it can be had. So we'll keep that in prayer, and don't have too much glee about this. This is a pretty serious thing, I think, for the church. And so we'll have to see where it goes. All right. When we return, we're going to talk about AI Jesus. Do you like the real one or the AI one? So I think I want the real one. But all right, we'll talk about that when we return.
This is Franciscan Media's Saint of the Day for November 22nd. Today we celebrate Saint Cecilia. Never mind that little to nothing is known about today's saint. Cecilia is one of the most famous and most popular saints of the early church. She is also one of the most famous of the Roman martyrs, though there is reason to doubt the details surrounding her death. We do have evidence of a late 4th century church named after her, and we do know that her feast was celebrated by the year 545. According to legend, Cecilia was a young Christian of high rank engaged to a Roman named Valerian. Through her influence, he was converted and later martyred along with his brother. Cecilia was thought to have met the same fate. Legend has it that after being struck 3 times on the neck with a sword, she lived for 3 days and asked the Pope to convert her home into a church. Since the time of the Renaissance, Cecilia has usually been portrayed in art with a viola or a small organ. The patron saint of musicians, she has become a symbol of the Church's conviction that good music is an integral part of the liturgy. There's more about the saints along with inspiration and Catholic resources at our website, saintoftheday.org. From Franciscan Media, this has been Saint of the Day.
This is The Quest from the studios of the Guadalupe Radio Network. Share the show with a friend. You can find us on social media. Want to listen again? We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, the free Guadalupe Radio app, or wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts.
All right, and we are back. I think Raymond Arroyo covered this in his show a bit yesterday, but I haven't gotten a chance to see it yet. But AI Jesus, artificial intelligence, if you don't know what AI means. This is now I think the news is being reported in such a way that some people are saying, well, they're offering AI confessions. No, they're not. It wouldn't be a valid confession, first of all. But secondly, I think that what doesn't help them is that they decided to locate this experience with the AI Jesus, kind of a hologram who talks with you and answers your questions, inside a confessional. and that turns the whole thing into, it gets translated poorly. The reason they chose to use this confessional was that it was a kind of a close. I love the way they put it, and people can interact with the hologram on an intimate basis. It's a hologram. What do you mean by intimate? Okay, but you get the idea. I'm having an intimate discussion with my computer. All right. But anyway, it says here that it says, yes, it was a practical decision to locate it in one of the church confessionals to encourage moments of intimacy with the hologram. Okay. All right. Human staff, however, are near at hand, with whom visitors are encouraged to speak if they want a more human interaction or to give feedback on the installation. Now, they point out that the avatar the AI is not as perfect as you might think. It still kind of comes across as sort of clunky and more of a technical object. So the developer here says, I'm glad that the avatar still comes across to a certain extent as a technical object, because there is a difference between the hologram and the real Jesus. Any rate, they claim that they taught this hologram by giving it a database of 456 church documents, including scripture and the catechism, code of canon law, general instruction of the Roman Missal, 90 different encyclicals, 7 apostolic constitutions, and 26 apostolic exhortations. And so they teach the computer with these documents, and they use AI, artificial intelligence, to sort of, when you come, well, like, Jesus, I'm having a problem with my marriage, and I really need to get some advice from you on this, And so then somehow this AI thing draws on this and makes Jesus appear to talk to you and give you advice. All right. Now, I think that, well, this whole thing with AI, I want to broaden the discussion a little bit to say I'm very concerned about it ultimately, because one of the problems we already have, and I'll be interested in what you think of this, Matthew, but one of the problems that we already have is that people are interacting with their phones. They have their face buried in this little device all day long. They walk past real people. They don't, the real relationships and real conversations. It's all virtual. And I remember the word virtual used to mean in the dictionary, sort of like, but not really. He's virtually insane, kind of like that. Virtual has kind of just come to mean computer to most people today, but virtual means sort of like, but not really. I have 5,000 Facebook friends, sort of, but not really. I wouldn't know any of them if I walked past them, maybe not any of them, but almost any of them if I walked past them in the train station. Okay, so again, this is a terrible problem we're coming into, and it's going to get worse with AI, because there are increasing things where these objects, these appear quite real, can often have you can sort of fine tune it, and it learns from you what you want to hear and how you react. And suddenly you have a best friend who just tells you everything you want to hear. And I'm afraid, I hate to be kind of graphic with it, but it's sort of the equivalent of the old blow-up dolls for men who couldn't find real women in their life, and it's just, I think we're heading down a rough patch with this kind of stuff. You can't just say, well, it has to go away. It's not going to go away. It's a technology. It's here. But I think we have to begin to insist on reality more and more. Anyway, what are your thoughts, Matthew?
Well, this reminds me of Catholic Answers created, I think it was called Father Justin or Justice.
Yeah.
And that became a little problematic. But that was really meant to more answer questions. I mean, maybe this is as well, but this level of intimate experience with the art that's a red flag for me.
Yeah.
You can give it all the encyclicals and the catechism, but it needs to have like real life experience to be able to sort of fill in the holes, right? It was actually interesting. Sarah and I on the show yesterday, she had put some stuff into AI and she got like really solid answers, and it was surprising, because what you feed AI essentially affects what it puts out to you. And we had a listener who was speculating that it was giving her very Catholic answers because it had realized that she was Catholic, and the question was, would it give sort of different answers if the algorithm realized that the person they were talking to was an atheist? I thought that was
good
a pretty
question.
interesting, very, very interesting perspective. But yeah, this is all new, but you allude to the problem, which is that people are already in virtual relationships, virtual friends. You know, many young people, their circle of friends is in like gaming communities, and they don't know these people in real ways, but in their minds they think that this is like this particular person who I go online with and play a video game with for 2 hours a day is really a friend, and it's just this false sense of reality. So I think this kind of falls into this false sense of reality. Putting it in the confessional, I think, is a horrible idea. I think that the church needs to work on a policy towards AI. Like you say, like, I don't think you can get rid of it. You know, it's like Mother Angelica saw the TV station and said, I want one of those, you know. St. Maximilian Kolbe heard about radio, and, you know, he used the radio for good and for spreading the gospel. So there's ways that we can use technology and leverage it for the truth and for the gospel. But I'm not a fan of this particular approach. I'll put it that way.
You can also see why some people would actually prefer their AI companions to real people. It's kind of like what they do with pets. You know, you can, your pet always loves you. You know, well, sometimes the real people in your life say, well, that's a dumb idea. You know, in other words, they don't always agree. And there's reality. Well, we in so many ways, we're living in kind of a Gnostic world. We're all living up in our head. Reality used to be something you would go out to meet, study it, and obey its rules. I mean, in fact, that's the whole scientific method there. And now it's like, but it's like, what does my body have to do with it? I feel this, so I think that. Well, because your body's about what you really are. I mean, anyway, you know, it's just this Gnosticism could know no ends with this AI stuff. And I don't know what we can do to limit the damage, except to say that we have to, I think, keep recommending that you need real human relationships, whether you like them or not, because real human relationships, well, here's my picture of family life. It's a rock tumbler. Remember those things we used to get at the hobby shop, you know, a little drum that rotates and you throw the rocks in there and throw some sand in there and turn that baby on for a couple of months. And all the stones come out all shiny and polished but the process is a little violent, you know, banging up against each other, rubbing off the rough edges and the sands of life. But that shows you the value, you know, of family life. It isn't always pleasant, but it's what makes you smooth and polished, and it perfects you. And real life, real people who don't just always go along with whatever you think are it's a very important part of getting more holy. So somewhere we're going to have to, you know, well, as I say, so many conversations we have to have, you know, with so many people about so many things. We were talking about all these political issues today and so on. And I know it's all overwhelming. I will say this, though, been my experience in studying church history, that sometimes God just sort of steps in and one or two figures come and they sweep a lot of stuff away quickly. And like Catherine of Siena, or you know, we have so many things. Saint Cecilia today is our saint. But anyway, God often has surprises up his sleeve too. So we don't have to fight every single individual issue and win on every single one. Sometimes God steps in and he clears the decks of a lot of things. We'll see what God has up his sleeve too. All right. Well, listen, may Almighty God bless you all, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Spreading the splendor of truth. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul.